exploding comet can have a lethal impact on the Earth. But the Tunguska comet was only about 165 feet wide. The Clovis comet that exploded over North America 13,000 years ago would have been nearly 3 miles wide, almost 100 times bigger.
The type of event that occurred for Tunguska had to have been small compared to the one that caused all this massive disappearance of peoples and mammals. It had to be much more devastating. It had to be much more widespread. It had to cover a large part of North America.
Could the explosion of a massive comet in Earth's atmosphere destroy an entire continent?
If you really did have this huge cometary explosion, you'd potentially had large areas that would have been decimated by forest fires. It would have been a very, very strange place with charcoal and dust everywhere on the surface where these fires have gone through.
Could a comet really be responsible for the destruction of nearly all life in North America 13,000 years ago? The search was on for evidence that could definitively link a comet to this continent-wide disaster. Scientists began their search by looking back at an astounding discovery made in 1966. Buried in the geological record from 13,000 years ago is something strange. A 2-inch thick layer of black fossilized rock. The same bizarre layer is found at Clovis sites, stretching from the Carolinas to California. Scientists dubbed this layer the black mat. They believe the black mat holds the secret to what nearly wiped out North America 13,000 years ago. "13,000 years ago, nearly all life in North America was destroyed in one massive event. Large animals like mammoths and saber-toothed tigers were killed off. Even the earliest Americans, known as the Clovis culture, were wiped out. Their fossils, tools, and all signs of life stop appearing at one moment in the geological record. The decline of the Clovis culture marked the end of human occupation of North America. It would be perhaps a century before humans set foot on this continent again.
What archaeologists call the Clovis people would have been those humans that were pretty widespread in what we now know as the United States around 13,000 calendar years ago. The Clovis people were us. They were probably Asians. They would have somehow been the ancestors of what we know as the American Indian, perhaps the distant ancestors of them. They were certainly people who in every way had the same intellectual capacity we do. So we have to think of them really as us, but in their world, which is very different than our world.
But what would be powerful enough to kill an entire continent?
It's difficult to imagine how you can kill a continent. It really is. And this is the difficult part about the hypothesis.
Theories about what happened 13,000 years ago abound. Scientists have suggested massive climate change, a continent-wide plague, or even a disruption in the food chain as possible scenarios. But none of these has been proven.
It's been a puzzle for some time. I think that the idea that climate would have been the culprit has been sort of perhaps intuitively obvious to many geologists and paleontologists who've observed the changes in life over many millions of years.
Scientists had puzzled about this for a long time. You know, there was suggestion that there was a pandemic disease that wiped these animals out. No evidence for it.
One thing is very clear. Something massive happened. And this event represents one of the biggest extinctions in the history of the world. In 2007, a new theory was proposed, that a comet exploded in the atmosphere and triggered a series of events that destroyed animals and humans.
It would have been sort of end of the world sort of scenario for those people.
If a comet did explode in the planet's atmosphere 13,000 years ago, the evidence has to exist. The first place scientists looked was in the geological record. In more than 20 different Clovis archaeological sites across North America, scientists have found something unusual, a 2-inch layer which they have dubbed a black mat. The unusual sediment dates to approximately 13,000 years ago, suggesting this layer could be tied to the extinction event. Beneath the black mat, mammoth bones and artifacts of the prehistoric Clovis people are found. Just above the black mat layer, few signs of humans or animals.
The telltale signs we do have at that boundary, at that time, these hints that something went on. And these hints include fine debris that was spread over the area. There was a layer where there were largely where all the mammals disappeared, and then there was this massive burning.
Could there also be physical evidence of a comet in the black mat? Scientists believe that if a comet were responsible for devastating North America, it would leave behind an interstellar trail, similar to the famous KT layer, a layer of clay that proved a massive asteroid slammed into the Earth 65 million years ago, killing the dinosaurs.
The KT boundary, the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary, this was a layer that was found at a certain horizon where there was a sudden dying across here, 75% of species. They discovered this big giant spike of iridium, and not just iridium, it was other types of elements that are associated with iridium that tells you that this had to be from a cosmic abundance, that is something that came from space.
In 2005, scientists gathered at a Clovis site known as Topper in South Carolina, looking for evidence of a comet. Professor Albert Goodyear was lead archaeologist at the site.
This is the approximate location sampled here in 2005. A large number of examples of the magnetized particles that they think came from literally out of space, and they were very clearly associated with the Clovis layer. Later on in the laboratory, they found high concentrations of iridium, nickel, and some sort of carbonized glass. Topper has trillions and trillions of nanodiamonds. The geophysicists regard nanodiamonds as sort of a high probability extraterrestrial element.
Just like with the KT layer, scientists now had proof that a comet or asteroid had played a role in the extinction of life in North America. But unlike 65 million years ago, when an asteroid left an enormous impact crater in the Yucatan Peninsula, there was no crater tied to an event in North America 13,000 years ago. Scientists believe the Clovis comet must have exploded in midair, just like the Tunguska comet of 1908.
When you have an impact, you're transferring all that energy of motion and you're converting it into energy of heat. It's still coming in as it flies through the atmosphere. So we're now dealing with the equivalent of a fire hose coming down on Earth at the same time we're having a shock wave traveling across the surface.
While it's unlikely a cometary explosion alone could have destroyed the continent, perhaps the aftermath of the explosion could. Was there also evidence of what happened after the explosion in the black mat layer? Professor Luann Becker of Johns Hopkins University studied samples taken from sites across the continent, searching for clues that a massive catastrophic event had taken place after the explosion. Samples taken from Clovis sites from California to the Carolinas all revealed evidence of soot. The presence of soot in each of these locations suggests that massive fires must have taken place right after the explosion and possibly swept across the continent.
I think there was significant fires at this event. Everywhere we looked, there's evidence for charcoal.